application. Dennis, now take us through this right here on actual panel.
Okay, so we've got the area prepared basically for our body filler application. Well, we did the pizza wipe down here, so we're all set with that. Now we want to make sure, lastly, that after I'm sure that this sheet metal is straight, I want to clean it with a good VOC compliant surface cleaner. So I want to make sure that I get any kind of the residue, any grease, wax, anything that's on here off of there. Because if I really want my body filler to stick to the sheet metal, I want to make sure it's clean. So I'm going to go ahead and just spritz this down, wipe it off with a clean, dry paper towel, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
And then I'm going to come over there and,
Yeah.
okay?
Big difference between what you think is clean and what is not.
Yeah. So even after that, so we'll go ahead and do this other side here too, so you can see what this looks like.
Yeah, big difference. This is my pizza.
So I already blew this off once with a blow gun. Really well. You know, I mean, I blew it off just like you would do in the shop. And I ran my hand over it, but now you can see we've got gloves on our hands as well. So we want to keep any kind of residue, any kind of contamination that's on our hands or anyplace else off this surface at this point.
Okay, now let's go to the next step. Obviously, applying the filler. Now, one of the things we've already talked about is the right aspect ratio of mixing hardener and filler, but also I want to talk about the edge, spreading over edge, because I think this is one of the things that definitely needs to be addressed and making sure these people out here watching the video get the right information.
Exactly. So that is a big issue. And the reason it's a big issue is this. If I put filler out over this edge, even though I've sanded this edge right here, and I drag filler or glaze, polyester glaze out over this edge, I risk the chance of there being an edge that shows up right along here later on down the road.
Now, we used to call those, well, let's be politically correct. We'll call them bullseyes. We call them other things in the body shop.
Yeah, okay, well, it could be repair mapping. That's another pretty common terminology that's used. But basically what it is it's this edge right here, right at the paint edge, that's showing back up through the paint job later on down the road, after all the paint is completely dry. And that's what, 30 days?
Yeah.
Okay, so you won't see that tomorrow when this goes out of your shop. You'll see it when the customer comes back and asks you about that edge right there. How come that's there? And you can buff it out, you can buff it out, and you can buff it out.
And is it going to buff?
It's not going to go away because it's a result of some other interactions with chemistry in that paint. So bottom line is, the old way is the better way to do it. If you remember back in the day, people always said, okay, filler, metal, paint.
Yes.
That's probably the best way. We do know from testing that we've done that we can end up with filler or glaze out here on this E-coat edge. So you see this gray area right here. We can get the filler out to there, and we won't suffer from any of that repair mapping. But if we take it out over this broken paint edge, that's when we're going to have repair mapping issues. So that's my recommendation.
All right, well, why don't we mix this up, show proper application, we'll wrap this up.
So here we go, Dennis. I got 2% hardener here, and we've actually weighed this out. So this is a really good example of what 2% worth of hardener looks like. That's the correct amount of hardener.
And I've seen a lot of people make the mistake, again, I got to bring it up, too much hardener.
Put that big gob of hardener across here, you're over baking the fill. You're going to end up with residual hardness left over in the filler. It's going to cause pore adhesion, it can cause staining, it can cause other issues with the filler. You want to get within that 1 to 3% range. So if you had a puddle of filler like this, for example, and you couldn't weigh it, then I would say maybe you put a stripe of hardener about 3/4 of the way across this puddle of filler. That's going to give you really close to 2% with the hardener at this density.
Definitely a good guideline to go by. But when you get that mixed up, what I want to do is have you get this mixed up and ready to put on a repair here, but I also want to talk about all of the steps to go through that. Proper guide code, proper application of the first, and maybe take us through that while you're getting this ready.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and just start mixing this hardener in, and I'm going to kind of fold it in, and I want to make sure that I'm squeezing the air down out of this filler while I'm doing the mixing process. I'm also trying to keep the hardener off the spreader. So I'm trying to mix this down into the filler and get it as efficiently and effectively mixed as I possibly can.
I've seen mistakes with that as well, where you're mixing your Bondo or your filler, and all of a sudden you look up at your knife, and there's a bunch of glue on it, and you realize you're not getting the actual hardener into the product.
Exactly. So if you just keep wiping it down into the board, I'm basically wiping on this mixing surface. I want to make sure that I get it mixed down in there. Another thing that people do that's really not a good practice is mixing their filler on cardboard. because the cardboard, most of it's processed with wax on the surface. And of course now if I put wax into my filler, I think that's going to help its adhesion any.
Guilty!
Yeah, probably not. So a disposable mixing board with a proper is the proper type of surface. You could use a piece of sheet metal, you could use a piece of glass or plexiglass. Those things would work too. But this is basically, you know, the right methodology and the right type of surface to mix your filler on. So I know just press this all out nice, get the filler up as pressed out as I can on the surface. The other thing this does is if it's really hot, it's going to give me a little bit more working time because I'm getting the filler out into a thin layer rather than in a puddle where it's going to build up and bulk and it's going to start to heat and it'll kick really fast that way.
You know what I love about coming here, Dennis, is the fact that I realize all the mistakes I made and all the times I've done body paint. So go ahead and take us to the next step.
So basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press down a tight coat of filler down into the substrate. Some people call it a tight coat, a scratch coat, a skim coat, whatever you want to call this. I'm trying to force the filler down into all the nooks and crannies and scratches that are on in the sheet metal. And I'm keeping it within that painted area. And now I'm going to add some more filler to this and I'm going to build it up in thin layers. So I'm just going to apply it in thin layers and build it a little higher than the surrounding area. And then I'm going to go to sanding. And so for the sanding purposes, what we like to use, we recommend starting out with an 80 grit. This filler sands really well with 80 grit. So I'll wait about 15 minutes or so, and it kind of depends on the temperature. And then I'll go ahead and sand this with some 80 grit, and then finish it with a 180 grit.
And always make sure to use guide codes.
That's a really good idea because it's going to show you where all the imperfections are. You don't have to guess about it. You can go ahead and apply the filler, guide coat it, sand it, guide coat it again, many times as you want. It's not going to hurt. All it's going to do is make the job better in the end.
And that's what you want. You want the job to be better in the end. Listen, if you want to know more about what Dennis and the entire 3M team is doing, 3mcollision.com. For now, I got work to do. I got to get back in the shop.